Welcome, everyone, to the Jeffrey Wolf Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers. This is our free introduction talk on Venus, sexuality, and evolution. And I'm joined here today with Kristin Fontana. Ari Moshe Wolfe will be joining us momentarily. Jason Holley, Jordyn Smith, Rose Marcus. Rav is not able to join us today. She's traveling, but she will be with us in this class series and is with us in spirit as well. And our intention today is to give a broad overview and introduction to what we'll be covering this year as a part of our association class series. Each year, the association has brought forward core teachings of evolutionary astrology as taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green. The intention that we carry is to help deepen in the lineage of evolutionary astrology as taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green, while simultaneously creating a community where we can learn and grow together. And this year we've chosen the topic of Venus, evolution, and sexuality as a place to immerse ourselves for learning over the course of 6 months. You're going to learn a lot from Ari, Kristin, Jason, Jordyn, and Rose today. And as we do, feel free to put questions in the chat. We'll be addressing things. We have a lot to cover in our introduction, so I'm going to turn it over to Kristin now, just so that we can begin the framework of EA. And at the end, I'll come in and share with you a little bit more about how to join the association in this class series, and I'll be just closing us out. So thank you all so much for being here.
Welcome, everybody. So Venus is stationary retrograde today in Aries. And what a perfect day to kick off this series. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, but we're not allowed to move forward. We're going back. We're going back into our past. We're going back deeper into ourselves, and we're slowing down so we can reflect upon who we are, and what we have to share with others. And so I am really excited about this series. Jason and I are going to kick it off in a couple of weeks looking at Aries, Venus in Aries, and the polarity Libra. And we evolve through polarities. So each one of us, each series and each class within the series, the teachers are going to talk about the sign and its polarity. So we're going to be on a journey together. We all have Venus in some place in our chart. We have it in a house, which also will condition that Venus. And so we're going to go deep in our learning. And one of the reasons beyond talking about Venus, because it's a time right now where we're all focused on our relationships and our relationship to ourselves, the retrograde can absolutely have us retracing steps with people we've known before, the unresolved content with people, unfinished business. It's a very karmic transit in that sense. And even if we don't actually re-meet somebody, from our past, we're more likely or most likely really feeling through all those memories that just we haven't finished feeling through. And in relationships in our life, we have come here on this journey to either culminate those connections or continue them. And we're deciding, especially with Venus and Aries, it's our choice now. Do I want to choose to continue with this soul, or do I want to culminate it? And so that is also part of this transit. Does this person reflect someone who can lead me forward in my journey? Am I a teacher for this person? Do I feel a responsibility to stay in this connection to help them evolve as well? That is part of evolution. And so these are questions that we're all going to be asking, feelings we're all going to be sifting through. We, as souls, attract people who reflect the dynamics that we are working on energetically. And so pay attention to who you're drawing into your life at this time, or who you've already been drawing into your life prior to this point in time, or leading up into this point in time. I mean, the power of evolutionary astrology, when we look at the soul's journey, our past, our present, and our future, we are all in a state of becoming. We are all evolving. And so if there's something that we've brought forward from another life that is unresolved or wants to be re-experienced or re-expressed in connection with others, then we will automatically, through Venus, vibrationally be drawing this into our life. We won't have to think it into being. We will magnetize it into our life, especially now with Venus and Aries. So Ari is still not arrived yet. His ear, here he is. Are you there, Ari? Okay. So Venus being retrograde in Aries, being the first sign of the zodiac, is going to be also retrograding back into Pisces. So I want you just to, as we're teaching about this archetype of Venus, you're going to be feeling now through the next 6 weeks and beyond, like you're straddling the past and the present moment, whether it's your own, evolving your own inner relationship to yourself, or whether you're working on the relationships in your life right now. And so we want to bring it back to the meaning of Venus in the birth chart, natal Venus in the birth chart, and what it means as the ruler for Taurus and as the ruler for Libra.
All
You
right,
hear,
so
there we go.
yep,
So go ahead and take it from here, Ari, and we'll join you as we do.
wonderful. So just starting off with what Kristin was saying, there's a quote from Jeffrey Wolf Green from the Pluto 2 book. Those whom we attract into our lives are symbols of our inner reality. We project outwards that which is a reflection of our inner reality. And he also often taught that in each lifetime, in the totality of our life, we're picking up from where we left off. And that doesn't mean literally you left off with, you know, in your last lifetime, you had a half-eaten bowl of Cheerios. So you're going to finish that bowl. Like, it's not a literal dimension. We're going to create the circumstances that are karmically relevant to whatever internal soul dynamics are yet unseen, are yet uncovered. And we are going to recreate the same relationship dynamics. And in the beautiful way that souls do this, rearranging the form, the structure, the circumstances around the same souls that we've known for a very, very long time. And I just think it's really beautiful to recognize Venus by its nature, which is so much about flexibility and adaptability and adjustment. We listen to how are we feeling, what's going on inside, and we're listening to what others are wanting, what others are needing. And we create 10,000 different kinds of relationships throughout our life at any given moment in time. And each relationship is its own listening. Each relationship is its own dance of adjustment. And it's just kind of beautiful to consider that the father-daughter or lover-lover or brother-sister relationship is a particular form, Saturn. It's a particular construct. That's how it's being held within the parameters of this lifetime. But on a soul level, these souls have known each other and dance in many different forms. So underneath the appearance of our relationships and the we can say the appearances, the forms are the template through which we're going to continue this learning and healing in this lifetime. Underneath it is the ongoing soul journey. And this is an interesting dimension if you think about the square between Libra and Capricorn, right? Capricorn corresponds to roles, the systems and structures of society. So Venus being a ruler of Libra, we can have, well, you're this person and I'm this person. This is your gender role. This is my gender role. This is how a child's supposed to behave. This is how a lover's supposed to behave. All of these shoulds and constructs. And this is where, in this Venus journey, on this journey of relationship and listening, we sometimes need to look beyond the conditioned roles because we can get stuck in the forms and the assumptions of, well, this is how it has to be, but really get into what's the evolutionary intent. What's the healing and the learning and the growth that wants to happen in these relationships through the vehicle of these forms, but not conditioned and entirely defined by them. It's such a beautiful thing to be grounded in because I think of my children often. They're my children, so there's a very particular parent-child relationship. But at the core, I think of them as souls, right? And I remind myself of that often, so that I don't become overly conditioned by those frameworks, and I can really stay in the truth of what's your soul journey, how can I give according to your soul needs, etc. So let's go over the Venus bottom line, and then we'll open it up to some interactions. What we're going to do is we're going to go over the Venus bottom line, core points of Venus. We're going to offer a very essential teaching on the relationship between Venus as the ruler of Taurus, Venus as the ruler of Libra, and the famous Yod from Libra to Pisces and Libra to Taurus, which is a very descriptive and helpful way of understanding the Venusian archetype. So we'll open up some discussion around that, and then we'll begin to go deeply into the various dimensions and specific topics of Venus, including giving and sharing, sexuality, the learning of balance, feelings, needs, and the ultimate lessons of giving. Okay. So Venus bottom line is relationship. How people and things enhance value. You know, we got these cups that are double lined, they're bigger, they stack. From a Venusian point of view, it's so nice. It's so nice to stack these cups and put them in the cabinet. You know, that's a very Venus thing. Highlights the difference between commodification or using people and things for our own personal gain, pleasure, and how they or it make us feel, versus relationship grounded in appreciation and conscious exchange rooted in mutual benefit, right? Of course, like I'm using this, but there's also a heart-centered relationship here. When we just use things or people because of how it makes us feel, we kind of fall more into that Venusian quality of self-interest. I'm orienting around my own pleasure or my own security versus a sense of connection and appreciation, which means we're not just taking. The energy of balance. Balance is a feeling, an inner state. We can all feel when we are out of balance. So Venus is about feelings and listening. Jeffrey Wolfe Green often said beautifully that Venus corresponds to the psychology of listening, right? We're not just hearing, we're really, what is that for you? What are your needs? What is your personal and authentic subjective reality? On the most gross level, we move towards what feels good and is reliable, and we move away from what doesn't feel good. On a deeper level, the internal assessment of what is truly valuable and worth it, because sometimes that means being uncomfortable, right? Like the more primal is like, this is uncomfortable, right? My sense of value or esteem or comfort is being threatened. But sometimes we go deeper and we make the choice to embrace discomfort because we know there's something valuable in it. And that's a big part of the Venusian journey, right? What relationship is without difficulty, for example? Transactional. Everything in life, all relationships are a natural give and take. When this is grounded in consent and mutuality, it is healthy. And that's like a very sort of mundane dimension of Venus. You're going to go to the store and there's a sense of balance and harmony because I'm giving you money and I'm buying the bread. And so many relationships, as simple as that sound, gets confusing because we project these expectations. I'm going to give this and you're going to give me this, but it wasn't grounded in conscious agreement. That's a very important dimension to unpack with Venus. So would anyone like to add to this before we move into the Taurus and Libra dimension? Any further reflections from the teaching group? Great, so let's go into some deeper nuance here. So Taurus is self-intimacy, how we take care of ourselves and provide for our own essential needs. This is our relationship to our very sensual physical reality. It's also our biological procreative impulse and our basic movement towards pleasure, perseverance, and sustenance of our human life. It corresponds to self-esteem, self-value, and self-preservation. So of course, we're not consciously thinking of that, like, I need to make sure I'm procreating the species. It's not a conscious thing, but we're biologically designed to procreate the species, right? Regardless of our sexuality, there's a sort of biology that orients us to being a sexual being. It's built into our very being. And thus that brings into we're not asexual plants. This is naturally going to lead towards the kind of Libra relationships that we form with all kinds of other people. We're wired to want to be attractive. We're wired to want to be available to attract that which we value and that which we want. So issues, self-interest or exclusive self-interest, masturbatory orientation, orienting exclusively to what I can get, possessive, shallow-minded, fixedly familiar with what one knows, deep resistance to change, holding on to what is reliable. It's important to appreciate the Taurian dimension of Venus is about self-reliance and self-resource. The resourcefulness is, okay, I have a need. How am I going to meet that need? And how often in relationship does that become an issue? Our partner or someone isn't meeting our need. And so we get frustrated. Remember, the Taurian dimension is, I'm going to take care of my own needs. I'm going to support my own self. So it's about survival and our ability to source and determine thoughtfully what it is we need and how we're going to get it. So there's a deep internal self-knowledge. I mean, Taurus really is one of the deepest archetypes for self-knowledge, really knowing oneself from within. And Taurus corresponds to the hermit archetype. So we spend a lot of time with ourselves getting to know, like, who am I? What do I want? How do I live? How do I embody my own values? So it's a very important quality. And yet, when we become overly fixed and dependent upon the things that we know, the things that feel good, we can actually lack a quality of resourcefulness because we don't look beyond the known. We don't look beyond what's familiar and comfortable. We just become dependent on it. So it's interesting how the Taurus Venusian archetype is both, in its healthy way, self-resource, being a resourceful person, but also the lack of that. I need this person to give this to me. I need these conditions to feel good. So we become overly fixed and dependent upon external factors. It's a very useful thing to contemplate with our own natal Venus signs. Superficially body-oriented, unwilling to face complexity of life experience. Just contemplate the Scorpio polarity to Taurus, right? You can be very pleasure or sexually oriented, but of course, Scorpio, you're having this deeper karmic exchange and all these deeper soul dynamics can easily open up. So life is complex. It's not just about pleasure and procreation. Other issues can be about self-esteem, low self-esteem, lack of self-value, and thus dependency on external sources, sex, pleasure, sensual distraction to establish a sense of value. And I think this is a very rich and nuanced, and I think we're going to get to go deeply into this today. I have this feeling. Self-esteem and the things that we do to qualify a sense of value is very intricate. And we can really have, each sign of Venus can have its own lecture on that. So what's important to grasp with this is the experience of a soul not feeling whole within themselves, lacking in self-value, lacking in self-esteem, on an existential level says, I am not really worthy of surviving, right? It's like imagine being rejected by someone that you're really attracted to. You're doing all the right things, you're dressing right, you're playing the game right, and they like, no, I'm not interested. That can have the impact of basically psychologically saying you're not worthy to procreate the species, right? I'm going to choose someone else. Your DNA isn't worthwhile. So just the lack of self-esteem can really have a deep impact on that sense of, do I even deserve to be here? And so that self-entitlement to be here, to want things, to take up space, to embody our physical lives is a very important quality of Venus. Okay, and within that, dissociation from feelings, numbing out. We can move to a sort of gross indulgence in pleasure, in distraction. What's interesting, the sensual reality of Venus through the Taurus dimension, it can be very sensual. It can look very embodied. Right? I'm sure we can all identify where we've seen this or identified this in ourselves. It can look very embodied. I'm thinking of like the Taurus personality structure, often very sensual, very embodied, but very often it's sort of the lack of embodiment, or it's like the shadow of embodiment. There's a deep sensual relationship to one's physical reality, to one's needs, but there can actually be a numbness in it. Checking out with sugar, with physical sensation, with pleasure, with sensual distraction, and that's actually a way of not being in the body, which is a survival mechanism, which can be a trauma dynamic. So that's an important dimension here. So that's the Taurus dimension. Now, when we speak about the Taurus and the Libra dimensions, obviously, wherever Venus is where both of these things exist, right? So it doesn't matter whether you have Venus in an air sign or Venus in an earth sign. Venus relates to the internal relationship to ourself, which we can say is the Taurus dimension, and how we project and extend and attract relationships, which we can say is the Libra dimension. So I'll share my Libra reflections, unless anyone wants to comment. Otherwise, I'll pause after the Libra part. Okay, so I'll move through this, and then we'll tune in. So how we listen to and hear the personal reality of others, the instinctual journey of finding balance and harmony within our relationships. Jeff Green often said, and I love him for this, Libra is inherently out of balance. It's learning balance. It's learning how to listen. I appreciate that, because one of the hardest things for Libra to do is to learn how to authentically listen. There can be the I'm listening, but am I really listening, or am I just trying to know what I can give to you so that I'm pleasing you? Like, the journey of listening is a practice. It's a maturation. To listen also means you have to kind of sort of be grounded in your own being at the same time. Because if you're not really going to be able to hold that space to be present with another. And a lot of your own unconscious patterns will be coming through as well. So we're learning balance. We're learning how to listen. And in that journey, we're going to explore extremes of all kinds. I'm going to be totally accommodating. I was like, okay, that's not working. I'm going to need to isolate myself and just say no a lot and not compromise my values. And we're exploring these extremes because we get to notice how we feel. And that exploration helps us learn what balance is. One of the really important, and this is, so up with Venus retrograde in Aries right now, because, Aries is that initiation, self-leadership. A very deep Venusian reflection is, when and how and where is it appropriate? Is it right? Which is an interesting word, right? To compromise for the sake of relationship. And when should we not compromise? And of course, there's not like an abstract, here's the rule, because you don't have rules. It's actually it's a dance. It's a journey that we all find for ourselves. And I think there's a learning curve that we all find, when to compromise, when to not, and how to know when, right? How to know which one's right, or what's appropriate when. And that journey of extremes is a part of it. How other people will provide for our own basic needs, expectations, agreements, and conditional ways of relating between any two people. Conditional isn't a bad word, by the way, just to be really clear. We get unconditional love. Conditional is a natural thing. It's like, again, I'm going to buy bread and I'm going to give you money for that bread. That's conditional. So people pleasing, addiction to affinity, and self-value linked to others is one of the core issues with the Libra dimension of Venus. I need you to like me. My own sense of self-value and esteem is dependent upon pleasing you. And then that extends into all things, do I know my own sexual needs? Am I orienting in a way that I know I'm giving what the other person wants? And it can be very difficult with Libra, because you ask, from the Libra dimension, you ask someone, or you ask yourself, well, what do I want? Well, I want them to be happy. Okay, good. So then I'm going to do this. We may not even know what it is we want or what's right for us, because there's a more superficial external layer of, I need them to feel good. But if we really explore it, we might inquire, what if they don't feel good? Well, then I'm going to feel unsafe. I'm not going to be loved, right? There's often this deeper dimension that we're not touching base with underneath the very common sort of confusion of Libra, like indecision. I don't know what to do. Often at the ground of that indecision is the fear of what will happen if we really listen to ourselves. Often. Compromise personal values based on fear of projection not being approved. Unspoken expectations and projections of needs without true basis in relating. I think, who was the guy? Something Grover, I think, coined or brought forward the term in relationships. We can have this issue of covert agreements or overt agreements. Basically, where agreements are being made, but no one's actually agreeing to them. They're just sort of being made. And so it's kind of like, you do these things for me, and I'm going to not sleep with anyone else, right? Like you give me a lot of sex, and I'm going to compromise spending the night with, my friends, or like just these ways in which we might compromise ourselves. And it's not actually spoken about like, hey, I want you to not do and do these things. And in exchange, it just becomes sort of a basis of how we adopt to each other. But what happens in those kinds of agreements, we create a pathway for ourselves where, because we're repressing, we're not really in touch with our feelings and how it actually feels for us. It's going to build resentment, right? This is going to lead towards a point where it's like, I have to be this for this person. And it never goes in a good direction. So it's really important, thus, with the Libra dimension of Venus, to bring everything out into the open. Right? In relationships, the ability to connect with, how do I feel? How is this working? What are our terms? What are our agreements? And that often means facing, oh, I don't like that, or you don't like that. The reality of listening to how we actually feel, how things are actually going, is often the thing that's avoided, because what does Venus not want to face? Confrontation. It wants to feel good.
Hey, Ari,
Yeah.
can you turn up your mic a little bit?
Oh yeah, thank you. Are people asking that?
Yes.
Oh geez. Next time, just jump in and let me know right away.
I just found out.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that, guys. That happens sometimes to me. Okay, is that better now?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
My apologies.
Yeah.
Okay. So, lastly, becoming out of balance with one's external relationships, if one's external relationships are not in harmony, there's a very common Libra Venus type of, like, we see this in sessions all the time, right? There's distress in our relationship. We can't sleep well, we can't eat well, we can't take care of ourselves. We become out of balance very easily, often, if there's distress or sort of a fundamental imbalance within our relationships. And until it's resolved, often we feel like we can't really do anything good for ourselves. And of course, that's not necessarily true. That's where some of the deeper intimacy and healing comes up. But it's a very common issue with the Libra dimension of Venus. Okay, team, does anyone want to add or speak to any of the pieces that I brought forward? All right, I'll keep on going.
Oh, Ari, I do have one
Please.
thing.
Yeah.
Whenever it comes to Taurus and like the natural sextile to Pisces, something that I see a lot now that I think should be addressed is that there's a lot of people who appear, it's like an illusion, that they're very self-reliant. Like, I think of the businessman who's made all of this money and people view him as really powerful, but yet everyone's doing everything for him behind the scenes. So like money equating to self-reliance when really those skills lack. And we can see the nuances of that in just different areas as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So let's go into the famous yodel relationship. This is the Libra yod. Let me just see how I organize this here. Yeah. So yods are always about adjustment, and you can really learn a lot about sort of just the larger Venusian archetype by analyzing the yod. Kristin, would you like to lead this?
Sure, I'll take over.
Great.
Yeah, thank you for just speaking to Venus from the Taurus perspective and the Libra perspective is they're so diametrically different. And because obviously the interrelationship to ourself, and when we cannot fulfill our own needs, we're going to be looking to others through the seventh house to fulfill what we can't fulfill for ourselves. So there's this projected needs on other people. And so that's why there is that angle of stress. It's called an inconjunct. It's kind of an orange line there, I suppose. And you can see that, if we have an expectation for somebody to meet our need and it's not met, it becomes a crisis through the inconjunct. And really, this inconjunct is a crisis aspect, because who can meet all of our needs? Nobody in the human form. At some point, someone's going to disappoint us. And yet we are expecting and attaching that that person can provide those needs. I will love you if becomes the inconjunct. And we all know what that feels like on some level. We've all experienced it somewhere along the line, I am sure. The other side of this is when you look at the Pisces archetype, Pisces is also forming an inconjunct to the Libra. the 12th house to the 7th house. And this is when in relationships, we are not only expecting something from another, we are putting them on a pedestal. We are seeing the good and the God in someone or the spirit of their potential. And then when they don't rise to the occasion or they don't really manifest in the ways, a relationship doesn't manifest in the ways that we have dreamed or idealized, then that becomes a disillusionment through the inconjunct on the other side. So from the 12th house to the 7th house, we've all done that too. And the reason being is this, that so often when we first meet somebody for the first time and there's an attraction and we have a feeling, there's a vibrational connection. I mean, all we can do with that feeling is imagine the best for that person, that experience. But ultimately over time, of course, we're human and we're naturally drawn into these connections karmically, vibrationally, so we can work something out from the past. But these two end conjuncts are angles of stress, the yod pointing to the 7th house, the being out of balance in relationships, and the reminder through the sextile from the 2nd house to the 12th house, the inner door is always open. The inner door to the 12th house, the inner door to your creator. I read a quote recently was this. It was, when there is true love, you know it's true love when your connection brings you closer to God. Wow. I mean, that is a ideal connection with somebody when you feel closer to God. And ultimately that will mean that there is no attachment and expectation via the 7th house. I will love you always, no matter what. I will love you unconditionally. It's not, I will love you if through the 2nd, 7th house in conjunct. 2nd house, 12th house sextile is I will love you always. This starts with our relationship to ourself, loving who you are, knowing you are not perfect, but you are a creation of God, goddess. You are, at your core, you are pure. And so this natural sextile between the 2nd house and the 12th house says, hey, turn in first, tune in first, walk through the inner door, access your own divinity, and then move forward into those relationships. So learning to love someone no matter what, without condition, is the highest form of love, and it will that give you that experience of feeling closer to God.
I want to add something to this. I love what you shared around, a relationship that brings you closer to God. The challenge with the Libra Pisces yod in conjunct can be, this relationship brings me closer to God because of how it makes me feel, right?
Yeah.
Like where it becomes this projection of I'm on cloud 9. And
But for how long?
how often do we see that? And suddenly they're not responding to your text messages, and it's like, God, why did you abandon me? So we have to be very mindful of our own delusions, how we project ultimate meaning.
Exactly.
And so Venus, we shared, is the rulership of Taurus and Libra, but also Venus is a lower octave of Neptune. So we're gonna, really speak about just the idea of giving, but also our conditions around giving and our expectations from a Venus Libra reality is, what do I expect on this more lateral sphere, right? The expectations with Neptune is more of a vertical sphere. So we can project through our relationships all of this ultimate meaning, like this is where my life is going to be saved. This is where I'm going to be saved by God. Or we can martyr ourselves. Again, I'm going to be everything for everyone, Pisces, Libra, but we can't. So there can be a lot of confusion that arises through that yod. And of course, the Taurus dimension fundamentally says you're not going to feel good, right? It's going to create an underlying state of imbalance. So does anyone want to add anything to this discussion before we move on to the next piece?
I want to add one more thing here. So this is a Jeff Green quote from the Pluto 2 book, and it is one of my favorite quotes in the whole book. he says this. So I want everybody to close your eyes when I say this quote. Close your eyes and reach back into your past. And I want you to remember those moments, those first moments of how you felt when you knew you met somebody that you've known before, somebody that made you feel something right away, at hello. He had me at hello. She had me at hello. And maybe it was not even hello. Maybe they just walked into the room and you're like, whoa, who is that? And you knew that everything from that moment was going to change. Your life would change because of this connection. This is the quote. He says, "The feeling of love that is ignited at the beginning of an attraction to another is to draw your soul closer together, or to draw your soul together so that the evolutionary and karmic reasons that any soul has relative to its ongoing evolutionary journey can be met." It's to draw your souls together so that your evolutionary and karmic reasons for your ongoing evolutionary journey can be met. So Taurus connects to our vibration, our magnetism. Everybody has one. Your vibration is going to come together with another very differently than someone else, right? We have specific karmic contracts, exchanges, histories together. And all those memories are held in the cells of our being. And so as you remember those experiences, it might have been the best you had ever felt in your life with that person, that connection, right? Those butterflies you get at the beginning. But that it's intended to make sure, to guarantee that your souls come together in a Plutonian way, in a karmic way. So, and it makes it almost perfect at the beginning, right? They can do no wrong. And then you must then move forward to work out whatever it might be. I mean, it doesn't stay that way, but to guarantee your togetherness, it starts that way. And then it's up to you to evolve the connection.
So, does anyone have any questions based on what we've taught so far? I see from Susan, can we look at the yod with other houses? Yeah, so you can take that Libra, Taurus, Pisces yod and put it anywhere, any house combination. And likewise, you can have any, if you have a yod involving the 7th, 12th, and 2nd houses, you could have any signs there. So this yod can be expressed in different ways. All right. So let's move on to some of the more specific topics. I'm just going to be looking at my notes here to guide us along. So we want to delve into just the archetype of sexuality and then giving and sharing. Of course, these are just essential parts of this human experience. So as I mentioned, sexuality, I'll share some, I'll get us started with some outline thoughts, and then I'm going to really want to invite a hearty discussion. And one of the reasons why we feel this is so important is because there really aren't a lot of spaces where we can thoughtfully address the truth, the actual lived reality of how these dynamics of sexuality and giving and sharing actually play out in our lives, right? We're wanting to really look at the nature of that. And this is something that we're intending to give a lot of focus on during each of our individual talks over the next several months. So I'll start with this idea. There's an underlying truth to the idea that we all train one another how we believe we should be treated. So I'll give an example. I'm going to be teaching on Venus and Gemini, okay? A Venus and Gemini person can easily be very curious, naturally drawn to exploring different values, different perspectives, and thus wanting to engage in different kinds of experience. It's going to learn a lot by engaging in all kinds of different relationships and actually need a lot of freedom in order to make that exploration. But there can be a sort of fleetiness that manifests there, right? And there can be a lack of ground in being overly socially available, right? Venus and Gemini. So the metaphor of always answering text messages, always communicating, always being mentally available to give one's energy, and that can become exhausting. That can become depleting. Let's imagine a Venus and Gemini person that is always answering, always available, always accommodating, always engaging all of the intellectual stimulation and the communication and the invitations for communication that are out there. In always being available, in always being open-minded, they're basically communicating their game for anything. Unless other people learn, oh, with this person, I can just start talking to them. I can go on and on and on because they're going to listen. Now, of course, the Venus in Gemini can also embody that quality, right? Just going on and on and on. But what happens is we become entrained in certain behaviors that teach other people what we're available for and what we're not available for. Right? We learn this in parenting. If we say no to our children, and at a certain point they get really upset and we start giving in, okay, I'll give you what you want, right? We teach them that as long as I complain enough, I'll get what I want, right? So we all have these different relationship patterns where our sense of self-value and what's right easily gets compromised. And if we don't know ourselves, if we don't practice that self-respect, it's very easy to fall into patterns of giving and sharing in relationship because we basically taught other people what we're available for. So with that Venus in Gemini, we might feel deeply depleted, scattered, ungrounded, and thus lacking in a deeper sense of fulfillment. But the question becomes, are we in touch with our feelings? Do we feel good about how we're showing up? Is this really working for us? So let's just hold that in mind, because all of these dynamics around sexuality, so much of it, and while there are many nuances to explore, we train ourselves and we train other people by setting a precedent. And again, that Venusian quality, it knows what it knows and it's familiar with what it's familiar with. And so we become familiar with what we expect, and we'd expect that of ourselves, we expect it of others. Okay, so sexuality is a procreative Taurian function linked to the survival of the species. Linked to Libra, we're going to have, pheromones, we're going to smell other people, we're going to want to be attractive, we're going to want to be available for other people. The need to be needed, the need to be available for others so that we're not left alone. So there's a natural instinctive element within the Venusian archetype to know how to make oneself. I mean, imagine when you go on a date. This could be more of the Pisces Libra. Generally, a first date, you're going to give your best, right? You're going to take a shower, groom, be thoughtful about your presentation. You're not going to act the way you will act a few years later when you're married to that person, right? You're going to bring your best self forward. Is that best self forward your true self? Kind of yes, kind of no, right? Like, yeah, good qualities, but like, it's not how you dress every day. That's not how you act every day. You're not showing them all of the shadow and all the bad habits and whatever, right? But we're not going to get anywhere if we're not good if we don't know how to show ourselves well. If we don't know how to advertise or promote ourselves. It's a very necessary, the peacock has to spread its colors and be attractive. And if we're not doing that, then we're not participating in this basic element of life, right? We might just expect things to happen for us, but we actually have to put forth effort in making ourselves available for others.
Ari, too, just to say that we evolve through relationships, right? So
Yeah.
the Taurus has to move out to the world and engage. That is, if we all know this for ourselves, that it is that our relationships are the very thing that propel us into those turns, right? We really we can't evolve as quickly or as intently or as directly or as intensely unless we are merging with others and learning about ourselves through those experiences. So it's all part of evolution.
So there's a natural Venusian satisfaction and fulfillment in being able to fulfill other people's needs. Because again, that means I'm valuable here. And so I'm going to be wanted, and I can preserve my own life and my own procreation and get my needs met. There's an underlying sense of good success. I'm meeting another person's needs. We see ourselves as valuable, and yet that can become a point of becoming commodified or overly depending upon pleasing others, and vice versa. And you bring that into the realm of now we're forming bonds. Think about the Libra square to Cancer. I'm forming an emotional bond where relationship becomes domestic, whether or not you're living with them, right? Just the sense of this is a point of underlying security. This is what creates a strong dynamic of codependency, where I'm dependent upon this form of giving, but it's actually just to sustain that sense of feeling good. Okay, So these are just some of the basic starting points. I want to really bring it to the team to delve into this more further. So who would like to take this further? Jason, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. I could say a couple of things that we had talking about. Um, and one thing, I just saw a question in the chat that I didn't want us to drop. Maybe I'll start with that, is just to say, someone asked about, because we're exploring the yod, and someone asked about the 410 square to the seventh house, the fourth house, 10th house. And I was just going to say that for me, and it gets to something I want to share that Ari's pointing to, for me, the thing I see most with that relationship speaks to is the way that parental dynamics will replicate in relationship, and relationship will create the crisis of consciousness or the crisis of action that actually provides a way to transform the early dynamic with the parent, right? You sometimes you got to work it out with the actual parent, and probably maybe not in this lifetime, but another. But in terms of the dynamic that's your own soul's material, you will tend to, I mean, I think we all know this, right? You either marry your parents or you turn your partner into your parent, or it's a very common process, but it's really shown by that archetypal square from the fourth and the 10th, mother, father, and how that will constellate there. But then again, the relational container, the relational bond will actually create a space in which the karmic dynamic can replicate, and then there's also the karmic dynamic can evolve. It can actually go somewhere else if there's consciousness brought to it, right? So to me, that's one of the most powerful things about relationship, is that capacity to be the place where all sorts of dynamics can constellate, and therefore, like sexuality, it's never in a vacuum from overall dynamics in one's own soul. It's always everything else too, right? It's sexuality isn't a separate thing. And so one of the most powerful things for me as a person who did sex therapy with people for 18 years, is really seeing how, you know, sexuality is a place where karmic dynamics, or like, either things from earlier in this life, what I was just saying about things like parent stuff, but also karmic dynamics from other lifetimes, they will bring themselves in the form of fantasy, or they'll bring themselves in the form of meeting someone who really stirs something in you, or in terms of different kinds of attractions. And those, that actually can become a place where different dynamics can be resolved. So people are often distressed by things they want, or people they want, or whatever. And, there's often a lot of shame about what one desires or who one desires. But if we really listen with ears of soul, which is, I think, what evolutionary astrology asks us to do over and over with everything in our lives, is like, what is this telling me about my soul? What is this telling me about my evolutionary situation? So sexuality is one where that is an incredibly powerful thing to really wonder about, what is the message? What am I showing myself with these desires? What's wanting to be expressed? What's wanting to happen in my life? And so, Venus, and that space of Venus that causes attractions uh, between us, or causes us to long for things or want things, um, creates magnetisms. It actually can draw us forward to exactly the evolutionary edge. That is really the possibility of a Venus situation. And so you can think of like sexual dynamics between people, or again, even within oneself, as fractals, right, of other patterns of some like different soul patterns that you can actually work with in that space. So and then, of course, that would also apply to harmful situations, like where desires move into the realm of obsession or compulsion. Right, that's another situation. And where, again, if you can understand what is the repetition compulsion, what is leading me to keep putting myself in this situation? Why do I, the sort of classic one, why do I always pick the unavailable person, or why am I always, why do I want to do these things that aren't consistent with my values? Why do I want to hurt people? Why do I want to be hurt? And all of that can, why is our question, right, in this mode of astrology. So It's an incredible antidote to sexual shame to have a context, right? And actually, you'll often see that when people are at key evolutionary thresholds, whether you're thinking in terms of lifetimes, like, if you're moving from a consensus way of being in the world to an individual, you almost always see sexual stuff getting a little wackadoodle.
Uh,
Meaning, oh my God, I'm attracted to something my culture says I shouldn't be, or whatever, that kind of thing. That's so often I see that so often together when there's a major evolutionary threshold being crossed, and sometimes it's even, I mean, for me personally, right, as a gay man, it's like the minute that I was into another boy and had the chance to experience it, I could no longer go in for a Christian for that particular type of Christian teaching that I grew up in, of fundamentalism. The minute my body immediately said, you're going to have to find a bigger context because this is here, like
Yeah.
this is here, and it's love because you do feel the presence of God, like what Ari was saying, and I mean that sincerely. I felt the light of my own soul shining through in that experience, and it's like, it took me across a threshold. It took me out of consensus and into the next thing. And often, we see that people do that in early life, move rapidly through those stages to get to the one the soul is actually home base. So anyhow, I think that's one of my favorite things about this. And when we were talking before, Ari was like, well, this is a Scorpio take. And I'm like, yeah. And then later I'm like, oh yeah, Venus and Scorpio, right? That's but
is that what you have?
but I think Ari's point is right. But and I think what I experience with this though is that, again, it's not even just traumas and hard things. It's what you like to do in bed, what you like to do with a partner. It doesn't have to be about trauma and dissociation and addiction and compulsion. It's just how you like to experience pleasure is gives you more information, and it's a richer experience then of connection. Um, so that's one big one that I wanted to name, is that fractal reality of sexuality that creates a play space or a workspace even for karmic dynamics. I think it's a beautiful gift we give each other, and in the process become deeply connected, bonded, empathic to one another's material, or to multiple people. I mean, again, there's not a model that's the right way to do this. So anyhow, that would be one thing I would add at the moment.
Yeah, that was so beautiful, Jason. It can be a workspace or a play space to work out the karmic intentions of the soul, or, to have a space of freedom. You're looking at the cardinal axis with Venus and Aries right now. There's that natural square to Capricorn. So much suppression, so much guilt people have if they're doing something that isn't the norm, or people aren't, approving of in some way. But what we teach in evolutionary astrology and our intentions is, what does it mean to be natural? What does it feel like to be honest? And there's being honest, and then if you take that energy and repress it, if you don't allow yourself to express it, if you don't follow the wave, if you don't catch the wave and ride it all the way home, then that energy that's repressed will come out distorted. You have to ride the wave of that desire. You have to allow yourself to do it and not suppress it. If you suppress it, it will come out in ways that would naturally make you feel guilty if it's not pure. But it can also be, if you understand why you have those fantasies or why you have that desire, and even understand it from a place of, wow, I was really pushing down that desire for a long time. It can be like a monk who's told, you have to be celibate. Well, what if that monk still has this strong Taurian or Aries energy within him, and it just keeps getting repressed, repressed, repressed? He's not going to go directly to God without some problems, right? We have to experience and actualize those desires that are coming up, that are instinctual or primal, and ultimately they're natural. And so what does it mean for that archetype Venus through the signs to be expressed naturally? What does it look like when we repress it? And that's what we're going to be teaching about in the coming months, one by one, sign by sign. And what does it look like for that archetype to evolve? What's the highest expression of Venus in Aries, or Venus in Libra? What is the most evolved expression? Not everybody with Venus in Aries, I'm sorry, not everyone with Venus in Libra is going to be over giving and out of balance if they're a very evolved soul. And Jordyn, you talked about this before we joined this meeting about sometimes there's points on our path if somebody is really evolved that attracts someone not as evolved, right? There will be a gap in the evolution. And they may be needing to give in those situations to help that soul evolve. But the bottom line is that, you know, as we evolve as souls, the Venus archetype in our life can be more balanced. That's what we're trying to establish here, and finding out, how do I live in that balance? And it does start with knowing what you need and knowing how to provide those needs, and absolutely not feeling shame or guilt because of any desire that you have, just looking at it and understanding it for what it is. And why is it standing there? Who told me that was wrong? And how long have I been repressing this? And like Jason, you know, I love what you just said. As soon as I came together with that boy, I experienced the light of my own soul. How can that be wrong? It's not wrong. And then that's your threshold, that's your gate, and you're walking on through.
Jordyn, do you want to speak to any of these things, or speak about the evolutionary stages insight that you're offering earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this with clients, and I think because I experienced it personally, I tend to attract clients who have this experience. When there's this evolutionary gap, and I'm talking about not a little one, a big one. If there's a little one, things can kind of balance themselves out. But whenever there's a really big evolutionary gap between two souls, there can be reasons. I've seen it with people who have been hiding for many lifetimes, you know, who they are. So now they're stuck in the consensus, but maybe they're more of a spiritual stage person, or whatever it may be. There can be this, you know, a really big evolutionary gap that, you know, becomes, it's felt. And at some point, the person who's more evolved definitely has to learn those lessons of supreme form of giving. And often I find how that looks is it's very much, there can still be this I love you, and I really wish that there can be this kind of Neptunian Piscean quality of I love you, I want to stay with you, and the security that comes. But then there's this need to really be able to look at someone through eyes of compassion and true love and say, this just isn't really compatible, not even just for yourself. That supreme form of giving is not being like, this just doesn't work for me. It's more of, no, I love you so much that I'm willing to let go of this, because I'm seeing that this gets in the way of not only my evolution, but your evolution too. And that can be a really big juncture at someone's developmental stage, evolutionary wise. And it teaches a really huge lesson. And it teaches a lesson that really goes back into that theme of needing to listen to oneself and to relate to oneself differently through spirit instead of through, you know, just the personality. It's really looking at having compassion for everyone. And there can be these trials and tribulations within this, I feel like, where we can attract different people that it's fated to kind of test us, you know, are you here? Do you need to re-experience this? And then we can also, if you swing so much to one way and you're so used to hiding or not listening to the inner voice, you can be confronted with really hard lessons around this dynamic as well. I've seen this, experienced it too, where I think it's important to kind of, I'm morphing into something else here, but it's really important for us to listen to ourselves when we come into contact with people. Because extremes can play out when we don't do that. And that is typically seen when we have repressed, suppressed ourselves, that hiding thing that that tends to go on too, and we're just playing out a certain dynamic because it's known and familiar, and we've done it for self-preservation for so long. But in my experience, it became dangerous for me. Truly, I almost lost my life over this in my 20s. And I think it's important for me to say my experience of meeting this person was I was absolutely repelled by this person, and I did not listen to myself. And because I had such massive self-esteem issues, I ended up getting into a situation that was so against my nature. And again, it almost cost me my life. But that extreme counteracted the extreme that I had been living for many, many lifetimes. And what it ended up doing is it taught me this Taurus lesson of how to be okay with being by myself. And once that lesson is learned and truly learned, it is where you can later get into our karmic story follows us in this lifetime. You know, it just kind of it's like layers of an onion are being peeled back. So again, this isn't a one size fits all, but I feel like maybe this could help people to demonstrate what I'm talking about. I went through that extreme, then I stayed by myself for 6 years. I was single. I got in a relationship with someone else, and he was completely passive, the absolute antithesis of the crazy, abusive, you know, person I had been with. And then that was like the point that I had to really learn that supreme form of giving of, I really truly love you, but this is, you know, not an arbitrary departing. This is a, let's be friends, and we're gonna, you know, accept each other for where we are. And then it taught me so much about my own values. And again, this lesson of needing to listen to oneself, because it was counteracting the extremes from one extreme to the other extreme to finally find harmony. And so there are these lessons that one can really go through. And I just wanted, you know, to speak about this because I feel like it's super important. There's so many people. It's not just me who's experienced something like this. Again, mine is kind of extreme, but it demonstrates this great, I feel like. So,
Beautiful.
yeah.
That identifying the reality of extremes is such a helpful point of self-awareness. And this reminds me of something that I want to try my best to articulate. It came up when you were speaking about the monk, right? And then almost like the inevitability of where we're not in touch with ourselves, we're going to inevitably be drawn towards extremes to create the counter awareness so that we can start to see what we haven't seen, right? I'm always here. At some point, our soul is going to be drawn here. And this is where there's like this beautiful, I almost think of it as a compassionate, humorous quality to this life journey. The ways in which we will form relationships are almost as diverse as there are people. And it's tailored in such a beautiful way that it fits our unique karmic and evolutionary reality. So just like take that monk. They're told to be celibate. They spend several lifetimes, right? And in their world, it's either, you know, celibate, monk, transcend, try to reach God, or the householder life, right? And there might be associations with both of those, right? The householder life might feel you're being far away from God. You don't want to do that. The monk is, well, I'm safe and secure, but I'm repressing my sexual needs. They might create situations for themselves where they're going to come into relationships that perhaps are completely beyond what they ever thought they would do. Perhaps what's accessible for their own learning would be to be approached by a sex worker one day who says, if you know, here's my business, here's how much it costs, here's my services. And that might interface with, oh, that's wrong. But then again, wait, this is safe. I get to explore my sexuality. I don't have to be committed. And there's a container to express something that I've been repressing, right? And so from a point of view of our own evolution, that's one of 10,000 examples of coming into an experience where that's actually evolutionary. And then you kind of expand that into all the different kinds of relationship. Like we were talking earlier before the talk, Jordyn, you're speaking of, and I don't know all those words. We have monogamy, polyamory, but then there's like 20 other terms
Yeah.
that are basically ways to begin to appreciate that on our soul journey, there are actually many valid ways of being in relationship that meets the edge of where we are growing right now. And I think the more we kind of cultivate this compassion and self-respect, we move further and further from these binaries of, all or nothing, right? Householder, monastic, monogamous or poly, right? And we recognize that in the realm of however billions of people are on this planet, if we're really open to this evolutionary journey, we are more open to experience, and then we're more open to making adjustments to receive and give what's truly helpful. And that's where we bring in the idea of relationship needs, right? Like, it's hard to look at a chart and say, okay, your Venus is here. This is what's on your descendant, right? Here are your needs. We can speak archetypally to here are the evolutionary lessons and dynamics that are being worked out, but your specific needs relative to those archetypes are actually going to evolve as you play out the life experience and become more self-aware. There might be phases where we're all going to need to explore certain dimensions, but then other phases where that won't be appropriate anymore.
A big piece of this too, I want to add for that monk example, because I'll just say the spiritual person, Venus and Aries, squaring the nodes, South Node in Capricorn. The guilt after meeting the sex worker would be permeating the soul because he was trained or taught that it's wrong to be sexual.
Say that again. South Node in Capricorn, okay.
South Node in Capricorn,
Venus and
Aries
instinctual.
squaring the nodes.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's natural maybe to have that outlet and not be in a relationship. But the problem for this particular soul, and this is a true story, the problem for this particular soul is that it manifested in such a way that it became just the guilt was so intense because he couldn't stop. I mean, there was so much repression that it ended up becoming a big problem, publicized, all of these things. And so you go back to this soul, and someone more evolved hopefully can say to him, it's not natural to repress your desire. And it's not, I mean, there are monks and spiritual souls that have advanced far enough where maybe they have been able to evolve that energy in some way, but this particular soul was not ready for that. And so it manifests in the ways that it does. I can't get enough. I can't get enough. And then the guilt, more repression. So it becomes this vicious cycle. So it's important for all of us to understand the difference between natural guilt and learned guilt. Why am I feeling guilty for having these desires? If a natural spiritual person talked to this soul, he maybe would have helped him unpack or unravel all of this stuff, so he wasn't, all this self-punishment didn't continue to happen. So that's another piece of it for all of us. We're all living in a culture that wants to judge every little thing. I mean, it really is important to be able to see clearly and to discern what is natural, what is not, and to embrace who you are and how you're put together, and to share those spaces with others who are aligned in the same way without guilt.
Beautiful. So, does anyone of the team want to add any more to this discussion on sexuality and giving?
Ooh, I have one thing that I want to say. Something that I've ran across with quite a few clients, and it was sparked whenever I was writing on the Lilith thread, the undistorted masculine. It's funny, I started having all of these clients that were coming in with this particular kind of dynamic, is how they were exploring their own masochism through forms of like BDSM and things like that, but yet they were doing it in a really safe container where it was with someone that they felt safe with, that it was truly around consent. And so there can be, Jason touched on this, like there can be these creative ways to go back into trauma through our sexuality. And I've often seen this with a lot of these people who are experiencing this. And I think for anyone who's wanting to be an astrologer, who's coming here learning about this, these are the areas like where I remember Jeff in one of his I don't know, his videos, he was like, you can't be judgmental if you're going to do this work. So, because people will come to you at a certain point and they will want to reveal their deepest, darkest secret that is wrapped in a pretty package, not really, of judgment, shame, and guilt. And it can often be around their sexuality, and they're needing to express how they're trying to explore this and how they're doing it through consent. And we can't judge that. And so, I found that it's people who have certain signatures in their chart, this can be a form of wanting to express their sexuality. Now it can get into a really dark dimension if they're doing something kind of like the monk, and not having these containers. But I have found people who they meet a partner and they're both attracted to similar things sexually. And they felt a lot of shame around it and they want to explore it. And so it does, you guys have all been talking about it. It all comes back down to consent and safety. And that's where the healing can come. And then when someone exhausts that desire, they exhaust that desire, correct? And it's not being suppressed anymore. So that is something that I wanted to touch on.
I want to add to that. You look at that Libra square to Capricorn. So we're going to have the imprinting of, okay, it's not okay to want these things or feel these things. And so the other dimension of that is this is where we often need to create these conscious frameworks, be it a consensual relationship or a therapeutic relationship, a counselor, right? Where in that Capricornian defined reality, there's total permission without judgment. And oftentimes, this is just a big part of the unraveling with Libra. We need to create these forms and establish these structures and grounds in our life to be able to access and explore parts of our being that are frozen or afraid or stifled or repressed because we never really learned that we're valid or acceptable or loved just by ourselves. So this is, the cardinal axis in general, the Libra Aries axis square in Capricorn Cancer, when we really get into unraveling our relationship dynamics, since we're so intimately bonded to our parents and how that conditions us. And of course, from a soul perspective, the imprinting from our parents is of course relevant to what we've chosen to receive. There's often this necessary journey of going back. This is what Jeff Green taught about that Capricorn Cancer dynamic, going back in order to go forward. We need that safety to explore. I'm going to say no to my mother. Okay, you be my mother, and I'm going to say no to you. And just creating these avenues so we're actually being able to kind of go back to where we abandoned ourselves, to where we betrayed ourselves, to where we learned that it's not okay to be or feel or want what we want. And that's a really important dimension here. Okay, so anyone else
Ari,
want to share? Yes.
Yeah, I think I have one more thing I wanted to share, just because I think it's also that maybe the Taurus zone, just the, also looking at sexuality and at Venus, about, creating bonds between people and creating shared values, creating shared sensibilities. One word with Taurus sometimes is resources, right? And that of course can become addictive to resources and material, all of that. But there's a resourcing quality to sexuality, and a way that it makes possible many, many things, right? A lot of times you'll see with couples, if there's a strong sexual attraction, that will sometimes that will sometimes be a glue while everything else is coming up, everything is going kind of wacky between them. And it actually sometimes that will, keep them in it so that they can actually move through some things. And I think it's a really, we also, there's also, speaking of sexuality as procreative, that's one way to look at it. But you could also just say it sustains social structures, it sustains the survival, it sustains that by creating bonds between people, by linking people with shared values and sensibilities. There's something for me, one of the things about it is seeing sexuality as and the erotic as an ongoing relationship with all of life. Like you're in continuous attractions, and that beauty and all these Venusian things actually create the possibility of incarnate life, which is how evolution happens in a human body. it involves us and evolves us both, like we're in here together. And there's, thinking about aesthetics and some of those parts of the Venusian experience, making, creating beauty, as you said, the perfection of, cup meets cup, whatever that might be, those are also erotic moments. Like
Mm,
part of the power of astrology is it shows us how things that might not seem connected are connected, like that eros and aesthetics and connection and community, they're all together. And I think especially right now when people are so bad at relating, and we are increasingly invited to relate to the computer rather than the person, and to the machine, and to encapsulate ourselves obediently to the Pluto and Aquarian oligarchs. Sexuality is going to be the practice of resistance in this moment. It is a common reality. And this is a Venus, I think Venus stationing in Aries is wanting me to say this. It's like, it is very common that when fascism and authoritarianism and insanity predominates, sexuality and sexual communities are often the ones that open and awaken. Like people get in touch with a really basic, like, what, this is not okay. They come into their bodies. And that's the other thing, is the embodying part. That's the Taurus part for me too. Back to body, which, sextiles you emotional body with Cancer, sextiles, it goes all the way around. But I just, that the experience of the resourcing of like the sexuality is like when you have a vibrant experience of sexual connection, it makes so many things in life. It infuses life in a really beautiful way, and that makes so much possible. So I just want that part of Venus also to be felt, and I hope when we're looking at Venus together, we can ask all these different questions. Yeah.
that's so beautiful. I love that you use the word erotic when describing the symmetry and beauty of two cups fitting together. It just elicits the poetry, the sensuality of life as it actually is, right? It's not just this feels good, like you're really bringing forward, eliciting that deeper quality of this is I'm sensually embodied and connected to the poetry and yumminess of life itself, and I just love that. Um, um, Rose, I was wondering if there's anything that you wanted to offer here, input in this conversation.
Oh gosh, well, I've just been holding back because I'm thinking that once I got started, I might go too far. But the natural yod between Taurus and Libra, that 150-degree angle, we're attracted to people that with that Libra piece of it, we tend to, the initial attraction here as we pour ourselves into that relationship. And we look at that as being, all of what we want. But in actuality, the Taurus Libra dynamic is an attraction to people who supply some of your needs, but not all of your needs, right? So, and that thrusts you back in on yourself, so that, which can be very frictional, but, it is meant to take you back into yourself to form that primary relationship with self.
Mm.
And the other thing I was thinking about is that, and this is kind of, tapping from past lifetimes and tapping from more ancient, is that oftentimes, I think sometimes sex and relationship is two separate things. And there's often times when you will call forth a sexual healer, right? And that sexual healer comes into your life for a period of time. The attraction can be very strong. And that may not be meant to be a relationship in kind of the Libra way of, partnering up and so forth, but someone will come into your life to affect that healing and then be gone, right? And I think that is, maybe Jason, you can, because that's your background, speak to that more. But sometimes those are real gifts in our life, and a time where someone comes in that, because of that soul to soul magnetic attraction, that you can have that intimacy with that person in a way that you might not have been able to do with, with the partner that you choose to move forward with. Jason, can you speak to that a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really am so glad you said that. I've seen that so frequently, and it reminds me of how we just don't have in our, at least in Anglophone Western culture, we don't have initiation into the sexual body. That's not a thing we have anymore as a cultural way. Instead, we have either repression or spectacle. Those are the two options for sex, and distortion. Spectacle of distortions, and so I exactly what you're saying. I think it's really powerful. Even though we don't find that in the culture, we may find that in our relational world, and our soul may draw that in, because we do need that experience. So yeah, I really, I think that's a really good one actually too, because it also just reminds that there are so many different reasons we're with different people, and I think, and that's been my own experience. I think that's part of why it really resonates. But I've seen that happen for a lot of people. We used to have
Yes.
surrogates. They used to have, even in the modern world, but that's not legal, and you have to kind of do all these things to make it work out. And anyway, yeah.
And that's that whole initiation too, right? And yeah, there can be, some of those things are quite profound experiences.
Yeah, and Rose, it's teaching non-attachment. It's if you have that experience that with someone who's helping you heal something, and you can't have that person indefinitely. It's just a space to experience that healing. There's no that Venus attachment piece that continues on. So, yeah, that is that teaching that Jordyn shared about that teacher then providing for that other person by appearing not to give. You are actually practicing the art of supreme giving by then helping another help themselves. They give you that healing experience, and then they're off. You're now helping yourself because you've, let them go. So that's another wonderful evolutionary teaching. Thank you for bringing that in too.
On this idea of no one will meet all of our needs, there's a quote, I'm paraphrasing, from Jeff Green that goes something like, it's a strategy designed by Creator that not one person will ever meet all of our needs, to make sure that we maintain our ground of dependency on God, right? If one person could be everything for us, we would never be thrown back to ourselves and look within to our deeper relationship to who we truly are and our relationship to the source. I just love that idea, because there's no possibility of complete and total satisfaction on the physical, worldly, relational level if we're only looking there. So we wanted to close with giving a little attention to just highlighting the sort of the higher dimension of the Venusian archetype. As I mentioned earlier, Venus being the lower octave of Neptune. So we'll spend a few minutes, and then we want to also maybe speak a little bit to this Venus retrograde, and then Michelle will introduce this upcoming class series. So just to appreciate whatever the form or the dynamics of a relationship, like Jordyn mentioned, I love you, but, right? There's something so essential that the Pisces Neptunian dimension is your well-being is inseparable from mine, right? The story that I project on you, who I think you are, is an outpicturing of what is inside of me. So there's this greater learning. I care for your well-being. I'm sincerely interested in your happiness. I'm sincerely interested in you being well, in you being free of suffering, like this authentic loving kindness. And I think a part of that yodel dynamic with that Libra-Pisces in conjunct is there is love. And there's a deep spiritual knowledge that we are one, we are inseparable. And that truth isn't even body defined, right? We can access the truth of that oneness inside, because it's not local. It's not limited by parameters. Then the confusion comes in. Okay, then how do I meet these relative needs and dynamics? And there's a purification. Sometimes there is a greater seeming sacrifice on behalf of unconditional love to really serve what's true. And sometimes that sacrifice is the not giving, as we mentioned. The actual Jeff Green quote is something like, sometimes the most supreme form of giving is in appearing not to give. Because in that not giving, we may not be meeting that relative need, but we understand that this is what's needed, and we're still grounded in love. And so really the higher octave, the higher dimension of all this Venusian work is the purification, refinement of our ability to love. And to abide and be love and share that love, to see that love in others as well. And when we get stuck in confusion, in unhealthy compromise, that obstructs that natural impulse of our soul to love and to be love. So this Libra journey of balance is actually one way of creatively interpreting it is we're learning to protect and nurture the free flow of spirit, right? The free flow of love by nurturing the unique journey and karmic needs and dances that have to happen within each relationship. So would anyone like to speak further on that before we move to just address the current Venus retrograde?
I just wanted to say too that if you're a soul that naturally wants to give and it feels good to give, your instinct is to keep on giving. But at some point, that's not going to feel good to give because then you're out of balance and you're not getting your needs met. So again, that higher octave is it. I can speak from experience. I'll probably share a little bit about this in the class, but when you have an experience of not giving and you know it's the right thing to do in that moment, the universe will immediately provide you some kind of feedback that you did the right thing because you can feel guilty for not giving. I'm withholding. Oh my gosh, I feel terrible about myself. All those negative emotions. But it's like, I know this is right for me. And so I have to honor what I need. I'm telling you, the universe will immediately show you, yes, a response and saying, this is a higher form of giving. And I think if you tell yourself, I'm still giving to that person, I'm offering that soul something so much more important than I could have in the physical form of giving, so much more for their soul. I'm inviting them to a higher place on the climb. And that is unbelievable. That feeling, it is unconditional. And it's just about keeping your energy in a place of knowing that you've given instead of feeling bad because you didn't give them in the way that they wanted you to in the moment.
Beautiful.
That's evolution, for sure.
So we wanted to offer a brief point on this Venus retrograde. So right now, as we're gathering, it's kind of fun. Venus is stationing right now. So we're all kind of in this beautiful ceremony vortex, entering into this phase. When Venus moves retrograde, there's a transformative process happening on the level of value and self-esteem and relationships. And of course, the karmic relationships that show up, the people show, and there's some sort of deeper evolutionary need that's beginning to unfold and clarify. So in this journey of Venus, and this is a part of why we're launching this series now, happening in the beginning of this Venus retrograde journey, this is an opportunity to heal all things Venus. How do I embody my greater soul value? What are my needs within relationship? What adjustments, what dances do I need to embrace at this time? And starting in Aries, it really does call upon that quality of self-leadership. So I'll just offer a quick dimension and then see if any of my team wants to add to this. Venus retrograde right now moving in Aries does call for that self-leadership. How comfortable are we with our anger, with our feelings? Do we get angry and accusative when we feel out of balance, or do we subdue that anger? Do we not express our feelings, right? For some of us, this might be a calling to step more into that leadership. Share what you need. Don't be afraid to individuate yourself. For others, it might feel frustrating, right? We might be demanding, I want this, I need this, but life isn't going to give us that. And so what do? Venus retrograde in Aries, we're not getting what we want. How do we cope? Sometimes this is to bring us back to our own feelings we actually haven't ever met on this life journey. So does anyone want to add any other points that feel helpful just in grounding us as we move into this Venus retrograde phase?
Yeah, we can be very reactive with Venus retrograde in Aries, right? It can be triggering. The things where we feel out of balance, there can be triggers all over the place. And it's going to be our job to learn the art of response, not to react in those spaces. So that, is a check-in point. If you're not somebody that normally expresses how you're feeling, this absolutely is an opportunity to find the courage to do that. So you can have your needs met. Not everybody's a mind reader, right? We need to voice how we're feeling and not repress it so the relationship doesn't become problematic. But That's my advice there. And for those of you that are really good at expressing how you're feeling, just count to 10 before you say anything, right? Right, Rose?
As an Aries, that's what I always say. The hardest lesson I ever had was to learn to count to 10. But I did want to point out that Aries, of course, is a sign that Mars rules, and we've just had 3 months of Mars retrograde. And on Monday, Mercury moves into Aries, and it won't turn retrograde until the middle of March. So the Venus retrograde is again another period of reflection on our instincts and impulses and the way that we are acting, and to really examine the nature of how we are seeking, how we're going about, how we are moving through whatever the challenges are of the moment. We have both right now Venus in retrograde and Mercury going direct, so we have the Mars component here from so many different angles. So I think it's fairly complex, right? In terms of trying to figure out about moving forward or holding back, and it's action and response, right? It's like, how am I responding to these things that are triggering up inside of me? And so
it's really about, like, I can't move forward until these things are dealt with. We can't move forward until we talk about this. We can't move forward until some of these things are healed. And it's giving you an opportunity and a space and a timeline to slow it down, to do the slow dance. Slow dance with yourself, slow dance with your partner, slow it down and turn in and check in with yourself. What is it that needs to heal in me before this new Aries energy begins? It's so important. And we are at an evolutionary threshold. We've got Neptune moving into Aries the end of this month. We've got Saturn moving into Aries the end of May. They'll both back into Pisces again later this year. This whole year is a do-si-do. This whole year is a cardinal dance. Don't be in a hurry. Time is an illusion. You're not running out of it. Just be present. Don't be in the past and don't be in the future. Just be here right now, or you will lose this moment to heal, to feel, to learn, and to know better what you need and how to come in balance with others with their needs. That's what it's about, for sure. All right, these two are talking in the background. Ari. All right, Ari,
Sorry,
turn on.
I
There you
needed to be
go.
unmuted.
Okay, I'm
Michelle's right over there.
like,
So Michelle's going to soon introduce the series, but I just wanted to invite, if anyone has any questions that feel alive in your soul, please be welcome to ask it. You could request yourself to be unmuted, and we can give a little bit of time to that. Like 5 minutes. All right, and I'm going to step out so that Michelle can step in since we're in the same room. Thank you, everyone, and I really enjoyed sharing this with you, and please join us. I'm going to hand it over to Michelle.
Thank you so much. I think you can't talk about Venus without talking about Mars. And while we're going to be focusing so predominantly on Venus throughout this class series, there's certainly that element of Mars desire and will and energy. I know Kristin did a talk on Mars in the conference last year, and that is available on the association website. But I just want to orient everyone to how we're moving through this class series. We're beginning just in 2 weeks from today on March 15th, and classes will be on Saturday. It'll be on the mid-Saturday of each month. The schedule is listed right here on the website. March 15th, we will have Aries and Libra. So we're going to be working in polarities, with teachers addressing Venus in each of the polarities. All of the elements that we talked about in today's class will be addressed within that very specific Venus sign. A great companion to this class, if you are wanting to follow the original teachings of Jeffrey Wolfe Green, is the Pluto 2 book. This expands upon both Venus and Mars in the signs, in addition to going into composite synastry, relationship dynamics, all kinds of things. So it's an incredible resource. It's one that I reference on a daily basis, including our planetary pairs class series from last year's membership was devoted to the aspects and phases that he also teaches in this book. So it's a really wonderful companion. But we're going to be addressing in each Saturday class the polarity, along with answering time for Q&A, for discussion, for active practice and engagement with charts. Each of our teachers will be preparing up to 4 chart examples to illustrate the polarities throughout the series. Kristin and Jason are going to kick it off with the Aries Libra polarity axis, and then Jordyn will be taking on Taurus and Scorpio. Following that, we'll have Ari Moshe doing Gemini and Sagittarius, and then Rav Chahal will be doing the Cancer Capricorn axis. So you'll see each one is going to build on the other, and each teacher, of course, brings their own unique flavor, but our real goal in this year's series is to weave a unified foundation of education around these polarities and around Venus and these signs, and what is the evolutionary intention and how are we to grow in this. I'll be doing Leo and Aquarius, and then we'll close the series with Rose Marcus doing Virgo and Pisces. And throughout, you'll have the opportunity to participate in live class. I know that for some of you, the time zone, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so like for our Australian friends or friends in the Southern Hemisphere might have a harder time with this time zone, or maybe your schedule doesn't allow Saturdays. There is all the recordings and all of the information presented will be available to you. So if your time zone is prohibitive to attending class live, you can still completely participate. And that includes being able to submit questions and have contact with the material through our course and through the platform that we've created. So please sign up, join us, whether you can join us live or whether you'll catch the replay at your preferred time. As a member of the association, not only will you get access to all of the live classes, all of the recordings, all of the material that goes with each of the classes, but in addition, this year, we're really wanting to encourage more teachers stepping forward. We're wanting to encourage more deepening in very specific topics. So association members will have a discount to our annual conference. You'll automatically get $50 off the conference no matter when you register. You will have access to free classes that we're going to be teaching throughout the year that will be taught by new and emerging evolutionary astrologers who are coming forward in our community to teach various different topics that have never been taught here on this platform. You will have access to deep dive workshops at a discounted rate that'll be taught by some of our core teachers, including, I know Jason is going to be teaching on the lunar nodes later on in the year. We hope that Rose will also be teaching something for us later on in the year. So we are working with Patricia Walsh to also coordinate a deep teaching later on. So there's a lot emerging where we really want to nurture a spirit of development and practice in this lineage. And one of the other things that we're doing right now is our pathway to mentorship. I can say that very soon we're going to be having a opportunity for folks to dive into the original Jeffrey Wolfe Green Pluto School and in our pathway to mentorship, we have folks who have already started and gone through the certification, preparing themselves for the chart practice, for the homework submissions with Deva, and getting direct one-on-one mentoring to become certified evolutionary astrologers through the School of Evolutionary Astrology. So it's really, our main goal here is to help each and every one of us in our evolution and to support this work in continuing to grow and expand and be available to the community in a way that everyone benefits from that. So thank you so much for joining us. Ari, is there anything else you want to say in closing?
Nah, just saying this being here.
Yeah. Well, there's so much. Someone was saying, just wondering about the imbalance of power, and is that Mars? Interesting.
I think within any relationship, the Venusian dimension can be the roles that we play, right? So one person can be the teacher, one person can be the student, and that's fine. But also, if it's not what's healthy for that relationship, that creates a sort of entangled balance dynamic. But that's a Venus thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in the future, I'd love to also explore the composite chart and all the teachings on the composite Pluto. That's another like footnote, and more on the Mars, because without, obviously without all the polarities, they are all part of an inclusive whole. The soul is an inclusive whole, and our only true desire is that bottom line desire to return to source, which for me is, I think, such a powerful place of purification, because in the world we have all kinds of desires that can be expressed, and many of them expressed through relationship. So as we're evolving and as we're shedding desires, we're going to have to work with that balance of Mars, the will, the separate will, which says, I am, I do, I want, and, that returning will, that desire to return to source ultimately.
Oh, and I mean, just to clarify, I see Kristin wrote Pluto. Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
power dynamics, of course, are Pluto, and then Mars is definitely connected with that too. There are many ways to take that question, I suppose.
Kristin, I wanted to see if you wanted to say anything, but also just before we go here, when you go to the website, right at the top of the page, you'll see the Venus class series. This is where we have all of the details on the class, and you can click on join us for the entire series, and it'll take you to the registration page. This is where you'll just select the $99, which includes all the different things that I spoke about, and it covers your entire membership for the 2025 series season. There's different ways to pay, and that is all I wanted to say. I hope that you will join us. And Kristin, any last words?
I think we said it all for today, but
I can't hear you.
You're not.
Thank you,
unmuted.
everybody, for showing up today, and just wishing you some evolution on the path this period in time.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here live. For those of you watching the recording, thank you for listening. I hope that all of these teachings have supported your journey in whatever way you choose to join us. We hope that you'll be here as a part of this community and know that you are welcome and know that you are loved. Thank you all so much. Have a great
Thank you
day.
all.
Bye
Bye.
for now.